Have the two top youngest teams in the W. And how about those young hoes from Washington, as they like to be called?
Did y'all just hear what she said? Did y'all just hear what she said? My goodness.
Yes, that is what they like to be called.
Yeah, that went out on an actual basketball broadcast. And if you heard it the first time and thought, there is no way she just said that, you were not alone. But the strange part is what came immediately after it, because the broadcaster appeared to explain that the phrase was supposedly what the Washington players like to be called. That context matters. It also does not magically erase how wild it sounded coming through a professional telecast. And this story gets much bigger than one awkward sentence, because later we are going to get into the argument over whether the WNBA actually applies its standards consistently when players, spectators, broadcasters, owners, and media personalities cross lines. That is where this stops being a blooper and becomes a much harder conversation.
This is crazy. Just the amount of disrespect this league is showing to young women, and they supposed to be pro girls. They supposed to be for the ladies. And this is a league that does the total opposite. Total opposite.
That reaction captures why the clip exploded. The immediate criticism is not simply that an offensive-sounding phrase was spoken. It is that a league built around promoting women athletes is constantly being judged by a much higher cultural standard than most sports leagues, and moments like this create an obvious credibility problem. Now, fairness matters here. If the Washington players themselves had adopted a nickname or inside joke that sounds completely different without context, then intent changes the story. A broadcaster repeating a player-created nickname is different from a broadcaster spontaneously insulting players. Those are not the same thing. But television is also television. The audience does not have a private locker room glossary sitting next to them. Millions of people hear the words first and receive the explanation second. That means judgment matters. Producers, announcers, teams, everybody involved has to understand how something is going to land outside the small circle that knows the joke. And this league already exists inside a permanent argument about respect, professionalism, player treatment, politics, marketing, and what kind of culture it wants to represent. So even a moment that may have an innocent explanation can turn into gasoline when the environment is already this combustible.
So this was Sophie Cunningham at a game. Now, this is around the time a lot of stuff is going on. You know, I'm guessing this was before the road trip. And this was Sophie, right? Now, the caption states she responds to criticism from liberals the same way. Let's watch this. If you know, you know. If you know, you know what Sophie mean when she's kiss her.
Then you get Sophie Cunningham. And notice how quickly the conversation changes. A tiny reaction clip gets pulled out of a game, gets attached to a political caption by somebody else, and suddenly the internet is interpreting a facial expression as a statement about an entire ideological fight. That is the WNBA media environment now. A player can smile, shrug, bump somebody, stare at somebody, or make a hand gesture, and within hours the clip can be repackaged as evidence for whatever argument somebody already wanted to make. That does not mean every interpretation is fake. Sophie has become a lightning rod because fans already associate her with a certain blunt, confrontational image, but the caption shown in the source is commentary placed over the footage. We do not hear Sophie say that political message in the clip itself. That distinction has to stay clear. What is interesting is why people are so eager to assign meaning to everything she does. Sophie Cunningham has become useful to both sides of the WNBA culture war. Fans who think the league is too politically uniform see her as somebody willing to resist the dominant tone. Critics see the same behavior and interpret it as provocation. Either way, every clip involving her gets amplified. And once individual players become symbols instead of basketball players, normal disagreements stop being normal. Every foul becomes ideology. Every quote becomes a referendum. Every friendship becomes evidence. Which brings us to Caitlin Clark and Kate Martin, because the next clip says something much more revealing about professional basketball than any viral caption does.
Honestly, I just miss the friendships because, that's what's so different at the professional level. Yeah, you have some of that, but it's your job. You got to perform, or you're just like every other job, or you're not going to have that job for much longer. So right. I think that's, it's a business. But here, obviously our culture is really different too. So that's what I definitely miss about it, is just randomly showing up at your guys' apartments and chilling and hanging out after practice or going to dinner or whatever it was. That's definitely what you miss the most.
That is Caitlin describing the difference between college and the pros in the simplest possible way. This is your job. That might sound obvious, but it explains a lot of tension fans misread. At Iowa, players lived around each other, went to class around each other, showed up at apartments, grabbed dinner, practiced, traveled, and grew inside the same environment for years. The professional level breaks that bubble. Now contracts matter, minutes matter, roster spots matter. Somebody getting more touches can affect somebody else's next deal. Somebody being injured can open an opportunity for somebody else. A teammate today might be on another roster next season. A player you genuinely like can also be competing for the same role. That does not mean professional teammates cannot be friends. Of course they can. Caitlin even says there is some of that, but she is describing a structural difference. College basketball can feel like a family because the institution creates a shared life. Professional basketball is a workplace built around performance, and that is important when people analyze every Indiana Fever interaction like it is a high school friendship drama. Caitlin Clark does not need to look thrilled in every photograph. Kelsey Mitchell does not need to publicly validate every fan argument. Teammates do not have to prove closeness to strangers online. The professional standard is simpler. Can you function together? Can you perform together? Can you win together? That is the relationship that actually matters.
Literally the exact same.
Oh.
It's just, and Iowa City is like, just the people around here are great. Everybody's so friendly, like the fans, everything. Carver, the environment,
Exactly.
the coaches, friendships, everything. I don't know, I miss it all, obviously, but it's fun whenever we get to have weekends like this and reminisce and just laugh about all the good times and all the funny moments that we've had over the years, so it makes it worth it.
Yeah.
Listen to how different that sounds from the stories constantly being projected onto Caitlin now. She is talking about missing Iowa City, the fans, Carver Hawkeye Arena, the coaches, the friendships, and the routine. There is no conspiracy hiding in that answer. It sounds like somebody remembering a period of her life that felt simpler. And that matters because fame changed the scale of everything around her. Caitlin did not just enter a basketball league. She entered an ecosystem where her attendance numbers, television audiences, sponsorship attention, teammates, rivals, hard fouls, and political symbolism are constantly debated by people who often want her to represent something she never volunteered to represent. That pressure affects everybody around her too. When Indiana promotes multiple stars, one group says the franchise is minimizing Caitlin. Another group says anything centered on Caitlin minimizes everybody else. If a teammate praises her, critics may call it pandering. If a teammate talks about her own accomplishments, fans may interpret that as jealousy. There is almost no neutral space left. That is why the professional versus college distinction is bigger than nostalgia. In college, Caitlin could largely be a basketball star. In the WNBA, she became part player, part business engine, part cultural argument, and part rating story. And once the league reaches that level of attention, leadership has to become much more disciplined, because the next controversy shows what happens when everybody involved starts talking past each other.
That was from last year. Now we got to move on to the last and final segment. That is Dan Dockich speaking about Natasha Cloud and his intercandidate situation. If you guys don't know, Dan Dockich be unloading on these girls. Now I'd love to do a collab with him. Let's roll it. If it would be nice if I could.
Did those things, and he became a threat.
Well, my question is now is ever-loving mind. She's not going to sleep with you, she started yelling. It's always a weird sex thing with these WNBA lesbians, isn't it?
Now we move into the Natasha Cloud and Ines Kanter freedom dispute, and this is where the temperature shoots up. Dan Dakich's commentary there is deliberately inflammatory. He makes the conflict personal, sexual, and ideological almost immediately. We should separate that style from the underlying question, because the underlying question is actually worth examining. What happened between a spectator and a player? What behavior triggered the confrontation? What did arena security do? What warning, if any, was required? What league or venue policy applied to the spectator? And was the player held to the same written standard? Those are answerable questions. The problem is that once commentary turns into insults about gender, sexuality, or race, people stop evaluating the evidence and start defending teams. One audience hears Dakich and decides everything he says must be wrong because the delivery is offensive. Another audience likes the aggression and accepts every conclusion without checking whether the facts support it. Both reactions are lazy. If you believe rules were enforced inconsistently, prove the inconsistency, show the rule, show the conduct, show the sequence, show the response. That case is much stronger than reducing a player to an identity category or insulting her appearance. And the controversy becomes even more revealing when Dakich turns from Natasha Cloud toward team ownership.
And then, of course, Cloud lost her mind, tried to act like a guy, act like she was going to beat his ass, which, of course, she's just a little girl trying to be a dude. But anyway, she's not going to sleep with you, and started cussing. Now, that's all confirmed with kids all around. I mean, because that's what we do, right? We always have to include that kids are around and make it look worse, and I did. So the truth of the matter is Natasha Cloud instigated the entire thing, and you hear the mumbling, stumbling of Michael Alter. Michael Alter actually made some decent points from his side. But once he got asked the real question about Natasha Cloud's action, you heard the mumbling, the stumbling. He didn't really stumble until he asked about, well, we're not here to talk.
That is the strongest factual question inside a very messy rant. If somebody was removed because of a threat or confrontation, what exactly caused the removal? According to the account being discussed, Dakic believes Cloud instigated the exchange and that Chicago Sky owner Michael Alter became evasive when reporters pressed him about her conduct. That is Dakic's interpretation. It should not be treated as independently established fact simply because he says it confidently. But accountability does require specificity. If an organization tells the public that somebody represented a threat, that label carries weight. It can affect reputation, access, and how every later report frames the person. So it is reasonable to ask what conduct met that threshold. At the same time, an arena does not have to tolerate every interaction simply because somebody purchased a ticket. Spectators can be removed for behavior that crosses venue rules even when they believe they were technically right in an argument. Players can also violate conduct expectations when responding. Both things can be true. The standard cannot be, which person do I politically agree with? The standard should be the actual policy, and this is exactly why the WNBA keeps getting dragged into these fights. Fans increasingly suspect that different rules exist depending on who is involved. Whether that perception is accurate in a specific case almost becomes secondary once leadership fails to explain decisions clearly. A vague explanation creates an information vacuum. Then commentators fill it with motives, fans fill it with politics, social media fills it with edited clips. By the time the facts arrive, most people have already chosen a side.
We're here to talk about a threat. Why was the threat? What happened? What instigated it? Of course you're there to talk about. Michael Alter is absolutely full of shit. He's full of shit, and he's just another white dude, white woman in that league that's scared to death of the African-American lesbian. I mean, let's just call it what it is. That's exactly what it is. And if you don't understand that, well, then you don't understand the leadership within the WNBA.
And this is where Dakic goes far beyond questioning enforcement and begins assigning motives based on race, sex, and sexual orientation. There is no evidence presented in this source establishing that Michael Alter acted because he was afraid of black lesbian players. That is Dakic's accusation, not a verified fact. You can criticize leadership without pretending to know what is inside somebody's head. In fact, the argument becomes stronger when you remove the speculation. If Alter's public explanation was inconsistent, show the inconsistency. If Natasha Cloud broke a league rule, identify the rule. If NS Cantor Freedom was removed without a required warning, establish whether that warning was actually mandatory in the circumstances. Those details are enough. The need to turn every administrative decision into a racial, sexual, or partisan theory is one reason these WNBA controversies become exhausting. It creates a competition to produce the most inflammatory explanation instead of the most accurate one. But there is another reason the league cannot simply ignore these fights. The audience has grown. More attention means more scrutiny. More scrutiny means incidents that once might have stayed local now become national content within minutes. And when millions of casual viewers are entering the product, consistency matters more than ever because these people do not have 10 years of context. They are deciding what the league is based on what they see right now.
He sounded incredibly nervous once he started talking about Cloud. Wasn't really nervous, was kind of condescending and defensive with the media. Well, I'm sure you'll ask him about that and all that other stuff. But once he got to Cloud, and that exposes Michael Alter as being completely full of shit. I don't give a damn how rich he is. I don't give a damn his hair. I don't give a damn about any of it. He's a lying, full of shit human being. Just say, look, I'm scared to death. African-American lesbians run this league. I'm a middle-aged white guy. I'm scared to death of having to deal with the aftermath of calling out what really happened.
Dakic keeps returning to the same accusation. He believes ownership is unwilling to criticize Cloud directly. Again, the motive he assigns is speculation, but the broader leadership test is legitimate. Can a league publicly defend its players while still disciplining them when necessary? Can it protect spectators while still removing spectators who cross the line? Can it stand against harassment while admitting when somebody on its own side behaves badly? A mature league has to be able to do all three. That is the deeper problem underneath the broadcaster clip from the beginning too. Standards only mean something when they survive uncomfortable situations. It is easy to say you respect women when everybody is reading a prepared statement. It is harder when a broadcaster says something that sounds degrading. It is easy to say you support player safety. It is harder when the confrontation involves a politically controversial spectator. It is easy to celebrate personality and authenticity. It is harder when one of your stars says something that upsets part of your audience. This is the payoff those separate stories were building toward. The real issue is not that every controversy proves the WNBA is hypocritical. Some of these incidents have missing context, disputed details, or highly partisan interpretations. The real issue is that the league's credibility is increasingly being measured by whether the same principles appear to apply when the identities and politics change. That is a much tougher standard than winning a social media argument.
Of all the problems the WNBA has, what would you say is the biggest? Not protecting Caitlin Clark, not marketing the stars, or always placating the LGBT, ABCDEFG crowd? I think it's the latter. Hey, look, Caitlin Clark gets beat up on the court. That's sometimes the price of fame. Marketing its stars, Caitlin Clark's doing a good job on her own. But placating these idiots is costing you fame.
Then Dakic gives his answer to what he considers the league's biggest problem. He argues that political appeasement is costing fans. That is his opinion, and reasonable people can disagree with it. There are fans who believe the WNBA's social activism is part of its identity, and one of the reasons they support it. Players have historically been outspoken on social issues, and asking them to suddenly become apolitical because the audience got larger would be its own kind of artificial marketing strategy. There are also viewers who came purely for basketball and resent feeling like every league controversy gets filtered through partisan politics. Both audiences exist. The business challenge is not necessarily choosing one and rejecting the other. The challenge is creating a professional environment where political disagreement does not determine who gets protected, punished, promoted, or dismissed. That is the distinction. A player supporting one political position should not receive a different officiating standard. A spectator supporting another political position should not receive a different conduct standard. A broadcaster with one worldview should not get a free pass for language that would create outrage if somebody else used it. If the league can demonstrate consistent rules, people can argue about politics forever, and the product survives. If the rules appear flexible, every decision becomes evidence of favoritism. And that becomes dangerous when Caitlin Clark is sitting at the center of the league's biggest business opportunity.
Response, an idiot, Natasha Cloud acting like an idiot, an owner, a white dude being scared of African-American sisters. Well, Ennis Cantor Freedom, being the Republican that he is, he was very calm, collected, and civil in a letter to the commissioner. Here is his stance. My letter to Commissioner Engelbert makes one point. Rules are rules. WNBA must enforce them fairly. I followed the league rules, yet I was ejected without the required warning, while Natasha Cloud faced no consequences for berating a spectator, a clear violation of league policy. Being labeled a threat will not intimidate me. I will continue standing up for women, fairness, and the principle that no player or organization is above its own rule. Good.
That statement from Enes Kanter Freedom is much more useful than the surrounding insults because it gives us a concrete claim. He says he followed league rules, says he was ejected without what he describes as a required warning, and argues that Natasha Cloud faced no consequences for berating a spectator. He is asking for equal enforcement. Those are his claims. The source provided here does not independently verify every detail of the arena policy or establish that Cloud committed a punishable violation, so that part should remain disputed unless documentation confirms it. But his framing is smart because rules are rules is difficult to dismiss as a principle. The league should want that standard too. If he violated policy, explain it. If he received a warning, document it. If no warning was required, say why. If Cloud's conduct was reviewed and did not meet the threshold for discipline, explain that. Transparency does not satisfy everybody, but it shrinks the room for conspiracy theories. And notice something else. Cantor's message is designed to position him as calm and procedural. Whether you agree with his politics or not, that presentation is strategically effective because it contrasts sharply with the chaotic footage and commentary around the dispute. That means the WNBA cannot respond only to his political identity. It has to respond to the factual claim. Was the rule applied correctly? That is the question.
On the Caitlin Clark note, Caitlin Clark dropped 37 on the big, fat, stupid head of Dejounte Carrington, who circled it as a revenge game. Oh, man, Dejounte, I guess maybe, well, didn't work out great for you, as Caitlin Clark remains, along with Sophie Cunningham, the only two people in that league that have sense and are interesting. Anyway, the WNBA got its biggest regular season attendance, the audience, since 1997, 3.31 million. That's all to see Caitlin Clark. Make no mistake.
And then Caitlin Clark re-enters the conversation, because sooner or later, almost every major WNBA argument seems to orbit back toward her. The speaker claims Clark scored 37 in a game framed as a revenge situation involving Dejounte Carrington. then points to an audience figure of 3.31 million and attributes that attention overwhelmingly to Clark. The exact causal claim deserves caution because television audiences are influenced by platform, scheduling, opponent, stakes, and promotion. But there is no serious argument anymore that Caitlin has had an enormous effect on interest in women's basketball. That creates leverage, and leverage creates resentment. Not necessarily inside locker rooms. We do not need to invent personal feuds, but across the sport, there is a genuine tension between two goals. One goal is maximizing the biggest star the league has seen in years. The other is making sure the league itself becomes bigger than one player. Those goals should complement each other. Too often, people treat them as mutually exclusive. If the WNBA aggressively markets Caitlin, critics say it disrespects established stars. If it spreads promotion evenly, Clark supporters say it is intentionally suppressing the person driving the largest audiences. If broadcasters talk about her constantly, people complain that other players disappear. If a broadcast does not center her, somebody immediately asks why the league is ignoring its biggest attraction. There is no version where everybody is happy, but there is a version where the league stops creating avoidable distractions. Clear discipline, clear communication, professional broadcasting. Aggressive star marketing without pretending only one player matters, and fewer situations where fans have to reverse engineer what the standards even are. That is how you turn a boom into something sustainable.
The WNBA got its biggest regular season attendance, the audience, since 1997, 3.31 million. That's all to see Caitlin Clark. Make no mistake.
Fact.
They can say what they want, but on every one of the venues, including Ion, Eon, whatever the hell it is, Caitlin Clark games are the...
That audience number is where all these cultural arguments collide with business reality. When millions of people show up for a regular season game, the WNBA is no longer operating in the relative privacy it had during smaller audience years. Everything gets magnified. A questionable broadcast remark gets clipped. A confrontation in the stands becomes national news. A player's social media activity becomes political content. A teammate's facial expression becomes a conspiracy theory. An owner's press conference gets analyzed word by word. That scrutiny can feel unfair, but it is also the price of relevance. The NFL lives under it. The NBA lives under it. Major college football lives under it. The biggest European soccer leagues live under it. When enormous audiences care, every inconsistency becomes content. So the league has a choice about what kind of growing pains it wants. It can dismiss criticism as people attacking women's basketball and risk missing legitimate concerns. Or it can accept that some criticism is opportunistic, partisan, and ugly while still recognizing the real administrative questions buried inside it. Those are not contradictory positions. Some people absolutely use the WNBA as a proxy battlefield for arguments they wanted to have anyway. And the WNBA can still make mistakes. Both can be true.
You guys can watch the full episode on Dead Dog. Dude is hilarious, man. Get down in the comment section. Let me know y'all thoughts about this one. Keep the bills on. Till next time, man. Shake the haters off. I'm out of here, guys. Peace out.
So go all the way back to that first clip. A broadcaster says something on air that sounds outrageous. Then context appears. Sophie Cunningham makes a gesture. Somebody else attaches a political interpretation to it. Caitlin Clark talks about missing the friendships and simplicity of college basketball, while fans scrutinize every professional relationship around her. Natasha Cloud gets into a confrontation that becomes a national argument over player conduct and spectator rights. Dan Dakich attacks the league with language that often crosses from criticism into unsupported speculation and personal insult. Enes Kanter Freedom answers by publicly framing his dispute around equal enforcement. And hovering above all of it is the same question. Does the WNBA have standards strong enough to survive the attention it has spent decades trying to attract? Because popularity does not only give you ratings, it gives you accountability. When fewer people are watching, contradictions can disappear in a news cycle. When millions are watching, somebody has the clip, somebody has the quote, somebody has the policy, and somebody is comparing what happened this week to what happened last month. That is why consistency matters more now than ever. And I do not think the solution is making the league politically silent. That would be unrealistic and frankly contrary to its history. Players are citizens. They are allowed to believe things. Fans are allowed to disagree with them. The solution is much less dramatic. Write clear rules. Apply them evenly. Explain controversial decisions quickly. Do not let vague statements create 3 days of speculation. Train broadcasters to understand that an inside joke can sound completely different to a national audience. Market the stars who move audiences while still building the next group behind them. And when somebody makes a legitimate criticism, answer the criticism instead of assuming the critic must hate the league. That is how serious organizations behave when attention gets bigger. Because Caitlin Clark's popularity might bring somebody through the door once. Sophie Cunningham might create viral engagement. Natasha Cloud might energize supporters who identify with her positions. Rivalries and controversy might generate clips, but none of that guarantees long-term trust. Trust comes from knowing what the rules are before the controversy happens. And that is the question I want you to answer in the comments. Which is the bigger problem for the WNBA right now? Inconsistent standards and leadership, or a media culture that turns every basketball controversy into politics? Pick one. Do not give me both. If you think the league needs to clean up its own standards first, say leadership. If you think commentators and fans are manufacturing a culture war around every incident, say media. Like the video, subscribe if you want more WNBA breakdowns without pretending disputed claims are proven facts, and turn on notifications because this league is getting bigger, louder, and more complicated by the week.